Hello and welcome back to Crew Parley, the flipped version of the normal parlay we do on this channel. Normally you folks submit prompts and I respond to them on the spot. This one is a prompt I submitted and we'll hear your responses. So the prompt I submitted was most and or least favorite genre terms. What labels have you most consistently liked or disliked? It would be fun to hear some speculation about why that might be as well. Obviously, almost all such terms are oversimplifications, but even if you think that, I bet you've come to feel that there are exceptions, certain genre terms that you feel are more consistently good or more consistently bad. This could be in games or other media like books or TV shows. Feel free to include one you like, one you dislike, or both. When in doubt, interpret this more open-endedly, as usual. And boy, did you have a lot to say. Yes, this is one of those topics where we all have enough experience with it that you're going to have some stuff to say about it. Like, you will have had a negative experience with it if you think about it a little bit. And genre terms are very bad for the most part, like extremely bad, so it's really easy to pick on them. But I still think it's true that there is a meaningful gradient of how bad they are from each other. Quick 1-minute summary of why I think genre terms are bad. The two main problems are that they are fundamentally a way where you try to take a shortcut. Instead of understanding the thing that you want to enjoy for entertainment, you want to not understand it and instead be given a label that tells you if you will like it. But it would be better to just understand it. This is in the category of thought tools that I think are not very useful in general, where at the core of the issue, the goal of using the thought tool is to not think about the subject. And people think that they don't want to think about the subject, but you do want to think about the subject. It's beneficial for very little work to think about the subject yourself more. So it's fundamentally not particularly productive to try to categorize things this way. There are some better, and I think in here there is maybe one or two arguably actually good genre terms, but even then it's really only good in that it's like a summary of a specific type of gameplay loop that is very particular, and so it's kind of helpful to know that that same sort of structure or philosophy is in the games, and it doesn't really tell you that much about the games, but it at least gives you an idea of, I get the general structure, and then maybe the game will tell you a gimmick and you go, oh, that structure with this like addition added to that structure, that sounds kind of cool. Okay, so sure, they can be made useful, but come on, you can make pretty much anything useful if you put your mind to it like that. That was 2 minutes, so I guess I failed at that. I just wanted to say that one more thing I think isn't good about these that nobody brought up directly, but a lot of you are orbiting around, so you're going to see it in a few people's responses, is that people want to use genre terms to define their personality. So a big problem with genre terms is that there's a shallow desire to use them to say what you are like, rather than like to find games. And that, like, again, this is a thing people think they want to do, but it actually isn't beneficial. But this creates a knock-on effect where genre terms that feel like they represent an image that people shallowly believe they want to represent are popular, despite being hilariously ineffective for actually finding things to enjoy, because people just kind of like or think they like to embody that genre idea. And so I do think it's pretty clear what is propping up a lot of these. You know, a natural consequence of this parlay that we're not going to get into that much, but I mean, the first step of it is pretty obvious, is why are genre terms so common if they're this bad? And the short answer, I think, is that some people think they want them to be this way. They don't actually benefit from that, but they don't know. They think they want to use them to define themselves. Like tags on a dating profile. I don't know. I don't even know if those exist. So there you go. Let's get started. Ragnavar, you said if we're talking narratively, there's a couple of genre tags I will always be averse to getting into. But the worst one in terms of being used as a label with the most WTF even is this genre supposed to be would be the genre tag drama. Ah, yes. Drama. And you know, for a lot of these, I want to invite the audience to take a moment to think, what do you think the genre tag orbits around? You know, useful definitions will be more like a word cloud, not like a Venn diagram, and certainly not like a single rigid definition. But Imagine works, I'm doing it now, that you feel like orbit around the genre term drama. It's it's pretty broad, right? You mean like that thing that is the rules that govern essentially all storytelling? Within traditional mainstream Western media, Ragnavar continues, a drama is already a broad genre, but with online recommendations and user tags, and especially around anime and manga, drama could mean anything from, hey, none of the main characters will ever actually discuss and try to work through any issues they have, just like actual people, to affecting character interactions that happen to be dramatic, all the way to, yeah, the writer, author, creator really wanted this to be dramatic, so at least half of the extended cast will end up dead, with the actually interesting stuff being a nightmare to find. That last one, where just like it basically just means a bunch of people are going to die, is a surprisingly common usage. Yeah, that's funny. Most other narrative genres I avoid are ones where I know what they suggest about the work well enough to know what I'd be getting into once combined with the synopsis. Sometimes I've been wrong and been rewarded, but in the current media landscape, playing it more cautiously seems to be the better move to make. Put a pin in it, and consciously coming back around to the works I've written off if they get lots of positive discussion around parts I didn't think they would contain, such as strong characterization, more nuanced story progression, or something else that I see as markers of a story being better than I thought they would be based on the synopsis and tags alone. Yeah, I definitely think that we're taking the pin out right away. This is an important point for this topic. You need to have some method by which you summarize media. I'm not criticizing, and I don't think any of you are criticizing, the need to do something to simplify whether you're going to try reading a book or watching a show or playing a game. That's not the criticism being leveled here. It's just that this is almost the worst possible tool for doing so. It's not that there's like no need to do that or something. And I've been frustrated in the past by this is more of a subtle distinction than it might appear. Because of people's criticism of modern attention spans, you'll often hear people say something like, oh, why, it takes like 100 pages to get into this, but then it's a really good book. And it's like, no, you can write a story like that it's clear is going to be something you would like or dislike in the first few pages. It's done all the time. I could give you many examples. I could give you examples of writers that often do this, so I know they can do it, but then in some of their books, they just don't do it. And I might posit various reasons why that might be the case, but I have very rarely been convinced that a story like needs to not show you what you're going to enjoy about it at the beginning. There's some narrative reason why it absolutely could not create a scene at the beginning that kind of demonstrates what the narrative is about. Really? Are you sure? No, I'm not convinced. I'm sure you could come up with an exception, but almost 99% of the time, absolutely not. You could totally have done that if you needed to. Now, I think that a lot of pieces of media don't do this because they don't feel like they, I guess, like need to. Again, people's standards are sort of weird about this. They'll lose attention really quickly, but also people have a tendency to be quite apologist for this kind of thing, thinking that simply taking it on faith the thing will be good. And again, this toxic idea of perseverance or hard work being good for its own sake, prevalent in our culture, causes people to be quite apologist for media that starts slowly. I have it on good authority that a lot of these things are just not good when you get into them. But people can be quite defensive of this idea, and I don't think it's a very strong defense. I think you can usually do the thing. But how it relates to this topic is that people will often further argue that you like don't need to do this. Like, why do you need to investigate so thoroughly whether the entertainment will be good? It doesn't have to take a long time. I mean, you don't, I guess. It doesn't have to take a long time. But I don't think that's a very good argument. I mean, you do need to find a way to pare through like all of the entertainment one might be interested in, especially as you continue expanding your perspective and get to the point where you could like pretty much anything if it's done well. And so there is now an infinite amount of entertainment that would be good that exists before you as a human being. You do need a way to sift through that and decide what you want to spend your time on. Exactly how much time that is worth, okay, that's kind of a separate topic. But personally, I feel like I do it effectively in a short enough period of time. There's really no argument that it like isn't worth maybe a few minutes in a lot of cases. I mean, maybe we will talk a little bit about this later because it's related, right? If you're going to say genre terms suck, well, what do you use instead? That, I guess that is a relevant topic. So we'll see how much it comes up. But yeah, I definitely don't think that's unfeasible. And I agree with you, Ragnavar. You need to have a way to do this. You know, unfortunately, some manner of disregarding a genre because it correlates with something, even if it doesn't necessarily cause it, and there could be exceptions, it causes something, it correlates something to be bad, is important. You have to do this in our current society. We already have enough media that is good that that's worth doing. I suspect that in the past, this actually been true for a while in humanity, that people ought to have done this or would have benefited from doing this, but they just kind of didn't. Again, there is this toxic idea that it's good to just tolerate a huge amount of your entertainment time being something you don't know you'll like. Certainly, it's not bad to have some time set aside to explore, but I would argue that that is a different activity than just trying to be entertained. Exploring and enjoying something for your intellectual interest in how it was constructed or where it came from, or just trying a bunch of new things for the sake of striking out and finding something new, I think is really good. Part of my explanation of what I do to find things I like will include doing that. I have scheduled time every week where I do that personally. That is a thing I do in my life right now. But I do feel it's helpful to think of that as a different activity than just sitting down to be entertained, during which time it is very important to have some, it's basically just standards, right? By which you reject certain pieces of media if they don't live up to something, some standards. Cool. Using genre terms as a way to discard the media is not the best approach using this information, in my opinion. The way I would suggest is more something, it's kind of similar, that is, the more genre terms a piece of media can be defined by, or is defined by, the more defined by a genre term a piece of media seems to be, the less good it's likely to be. Basically, the more derivative it's likely to be. And if you just get people to pitch things to you and watch or play or read the things that people have more trouble pitching to you, shockingly consistently, those will be better because there just isn't a way to put them in a box, and thus they are doing their own thing. They don't rely on the audience just settling for something they're familiar with and like a little bit. They want the audience to enjoy them because they're just good on their own merits. And I think that, quite simply, if you just get things that are harder for people to summarize, they are mostly just better. Obviously, this requires that you have a standard of people that are like good in theory, capable in theory of summarizing things. But if I asked all of you during one of our Twitch streams to recommend stuff, and then I took the recommendations that you had the most trouble pitching to me, I can guarantee you those would be the better of those works. Anyway, a technique among several that I find effective. But it gets worse. After all, a lot of this was for like not video games. When it comes to genres for aspects such as gameplay, I generally don't think they're really that useful at all, other than the broadest strokes aspects of an experience. After all, you can see a video game being consumed by going to watch gameplay. So if all they do is give you a general idea, you know, if a novel says it's a romance novel, like, you would need to read the novel, and it's somewhat subjective whether that's the case. But if a game is tagged as a first-person shooter, I mean, watching gameplay for 5 seconds would have told you that. You know what I mean? Like, you can't do that in the same way with something like a book as easily, whereas with video games, if that's all genres are doing, they're even less useful for video games because you could just see that with your eyes by looking at it for 2 seconds. Yeah. If I'm looking for a strategic, bigger picture gameplay experience, I'm not going to be looking into the shooter or RPG genre categories of Steam. That isn't to say it isn't useful to have them for categorization per se. I can get an idea as to the general vibes of the experience from genre tags, just not the specifics. I'd need to watch gameplay for that. And my point earlier was that you would also get a general vibe from that kind of thing. Coming back to this with fresh eyes, Ragnavar commented a few days later, I think the root issue for me is that once a genre label is used to describe something extremely broad, it's got a good chance of not being able to give me an idea as to what something tagged with it will be like, which is the only reason to categorize things to begin with. Well, with a side note to that thing I said before, that it's not a good reason, But a major other reason people categorize things is for themselves, to construct a cardboard cutout personality of themselves with them. But the only good reason to categorize things, right, is to give you an idea of what you're getting into. Sure. Gameplay genres have the issue the worst, in my opinion, thanks to how massively different one game could be from another, even if they shared all of the same genre tags and didn't have any extra ones. Not that people wouldn't immediately create more to create that delineation between them if they were that different, as we don't have the vocabulary and pre-existing knowledge base to refer to gameplay experiences like we have for narrative structures, tropes, and themes. Huge point, in my opinion, yes. Part of the issue here is just that gaming as a medium is younger, and it's that a lot of people don't know, but also making things even worse, think they do know what they enjoy about a game that they play. And so a lot of the time, games could have the exact same genre tags and no others, but be very different. And the reason is that what matters is the details, how you do those things, not what they are doing. I heard this quote one time that I feel like I use every third parlay. And it was out of context on TV. I don't watch TV. It was like at my folks' place, and I have no idea what the context is. But the person said, it matters what you like, not how you like it, which is such a phenomenally wrong and stupid thing, such an anti-enlightened thing to say. What you like matters absolutely not at all, less and less every day you walk forward in your life. It only matters how you like things. It doesn't matter what you do, it only matters how you do it. And the same thing with games. The fact that a game is a first-person shooter means almost nothing at all. It only matters how it is a first-person shooter. Is there a meaningful ammo economy? Is it like an abilities on cooldowns first-person shooter? What is the movement like? Is it a cover shooter, or does it have Titanfall 2 parkouring off of mechas also you can get into the mechas? These things are essentially completely unrelated activities. They just come from a certain perspective. Certainly, I don't know, my mom, who plays video games, is nauseated by first-person perspective. But like literally besides that, there's essentially no meaningful differences. And so I would argue, yeah, this is a place where the medium is just not fixated on the parts of games that actually matter. They're fixated on trailers that tell you and show you nothing about the game. They're fixated on the broad genre terms, which are literally just things you would see by watching 5 seconds of gameplay, that rather than, you get to customize your character, but how? In what way? Like, what is the goal? This is an MMORPG. Okay, are the bosses like enrage timers where you work together with a raid group of 15 people and you have to carefully execute your rotation? Are they more chaotic and you need to fend for yourself and figure out how to survive for long enough that you can actually execute your damage, which once you do it, there's really no doubt you're going to do enough damage in time. Those games, respectively, I would say are Final Fantasy XIV and Guild Wars 2 at times. And they have similar looking, maybe, rating experiences to some people, but really couldn't be more different once you actually sit down to play them, at least in my experience. And so, right, while that's not a perfect example, this is a case where you probably could make genre terms a lot more useful for video games, actually, because video games have more specific mechanics that are visible to them. It's surprising how specific some modern literary genres can be, but it's weird because with something like a book, it's always kind of a gray area whether that actually is the mechanic of the story. Whereas in a video game, you could, in theory, people just don't, more objectively say, oh, this is a game that has a build making experience. It has this focus on opportunity cost, and you have limited space, and the choices are meant to be like relatively equally balanced, but they give you different gameplay experiences. You could, and I'm trying to, make that into a defined, usable genre idea, but that's just not currently what most of humanity does with video games. It probably will be what people do in the future, more and more. So I guess it'll get better over time, but go figure. Even within those areas, however, Ragnarvar continues, the genres and the labels and tags we use to categorize works into them are thought of as being more important than they actually are in practice. It's less that genres are hard, rigid boxes that have clear separation, with any work having to sit cleanly into one or the other box, and instead closer to the circles on a Venn diagram with way too many dimensions to picture in our minds. Right, and it is closest to a word cloud, according to me. Any work could exist in the overlap between any arbitrary category we create a label for, and those labels only have value when taken as a whole, and even then, that's only going to tell you so much about it, and you're going to need to make a judgment call whether to risk exploring it or not, depending on your personal tastes, the boundaries of what you're willing to explore within fiction right now. I think a lot of people are stuck between genres as set boxes and genres as Venn diagrams, as most people understand intuitively that Star Wars and The Expanse, good examples, are vastly different despite both being sci-fi. But there's still a lingering sense of, yeah, I don't like sci-fi, and the likes that stop people from being open to different experiences, and thus genres continue to balloon out beyond usefulness. There's another part of your response to Ragnavar that is about genres being too specific, which I'm going to come back to later. Yeah, I have this great quote from somebody in my personal life who just said I was pitching a game to them, and the game is very similar to a lot of specific gameplay mechanic oriented requirements that they said they have for a game they're going to play right now. They don't have a lot of time, but they want to play games. What do you recommend? Here's some very specific, they did a really good job, things I want out of the game. And I recommended a game, and they said, "Oh, no, 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 I hate space." And I said, just it's that's really too bad. They're on account of there being quite a lot of it, right? And they I don't like sci-fi, they claimed. Like, no, you do have a specific complaint, and that comment isn't useful until you locate that specific complaint. Like, it's sort of absurd to suggest that you like there being a focus on future technology in a work means you can't like it. And I mean, what about works that you might label sci-fi, or their I guess like tone or framing is sci-fi, but they're from a while ago, and so we actually have that technology now, just as an example. Would you dislike those? I would imagine no. I mean, based on the space comment. And of course, after talking with this person for a while, they did a very good job with this. I'm burning my friends for fun. This person's not some moron. They were really smart when they responded this way. Just because they haven't fully propagated that mindset doesn't make them some kind of idiot. And eventually they settled on, well, it's because they feel like sci-fi is usually very cramped. Like we're following a spaceship or a colony, and weirdly that can make the world feel small compared to exploring a big fantasy world. Yeah, I think that is like vaguely generally a trend, sure. Though there's lots of sci-fi I can think of that doesn't follow those rules, and it's not very useful. I don't think sci-fi correlates strongly enough with that perspective that you ought to use sci-fi as a like shortcut to avoid, just because maybe 33% of sci-fi does have that type of storytelling element. It's also quite an assumption to assume that just because the story is like in a cramped space, it will therefore be similar in many other ways to other stories in cramped spaces. I think that is demonstrably not true. But it's a more interesting claim. I hope you can see. That's a burn for myself, because I know this person is smart. Like, I thought that was an interesting comment, and they were able to dig into it. We all have idiotically simple oversimplifications in our value system. They did a good job unpacking that. But I thought it was funny as a good example of, yeah, like, is that really that useful? And again, I think I agree with you, Ragnavar, that more than the genre terms actually being an issue, which is easy to demonstrate, I feel like we have done that to death already, and there's still like 3/4 of the parlay left. And also it's pretty easy to like do things other than use genre terms to find something you like. I think the problem is that people still have this lingering sense that that's like the thing you do, or people have a sort of social inertia, is what I often think of it, where striking out on your own, a lot of people have this trouble, as social animals that we humans are, of taking their own value system and saying everybody else in the entire world does it this way, but that means nothing, and my way is better by itself. Most of the time, you have to be very arrogant and ignorant to think that. And what you need to do to have a more effective approach is to acknowledge that, no, the way people do it really is very bad. And so even though you need to be humble, you're not all that, we're not going to solve the universe of entertainment right now, you probably can come up with a better way to categorize things than other people can. You're just going to need to be open to the ways that other people do it to improve that method. I think that's the big difference between people that go, everyone else is a moron, listen to me, and people who go, I think I might be able to improve on humanity. You know, the thing that all of humanity is defined by. So yes, I personally would label social inertia as being the criminal here. All right, this is getting a bit negative. How about a genre term that doesn't completely suck a ginormous ass? And here we are. Mr. Food. True Parley Grandmaster Food says, I originally had something else here, but then I remembered that 4X strategy is the best genre term. It's a shorthand for explore, expand, exploit, exterminate, 4X, usually the X is capital in my experience, and describes the core gameplay pillars of these strategy games. Explore refers to your lack of information in the beginning. You need to invest resources to gain information, and with it, the ability to make smart decisions. Expand refers to the expansion to new lands you've explored, increasing your potential economic output and control over strategic areas of the map. Exploit is the maximization of the resource output of your territories. You need to invest significant resources into the exploitation, and you need to do it smartly to scale quicker than your enemies. Finally, exterminate refers to the interactions with other players who want to exterminate you for fame, profit, and victory. Every good 4X game is a beautiful balancing act of the 4X's. You want to build armies? Well, you better improve the exploitation of your economy so you can build and support troops. But scaling small empires is relatively slow and prone to attacks against single points. It's also difficult to cover all of your strategic resources with little territory. So you better expand early to have that covered. But where to expand to? Well, investing into exploration will help you make smart decisions at the cost of time. Expanding too fast is also dangerous because it is difficult to hold on to a lot of territory. So you better invest into the exploration of your enemies so that you know where they are preparing an attack, and you have the correct troops to counter them. And with the question of how do we get troops, we're back at the beginning. It's all one massive balancing act of opportunity cost. Great. Yeah, I mean, this is a really good example of how different this is from other genre terms. The genre term is what you do in the game. It's like a multiplayer, you know, real-time strategy, or it might not be real-time type of game, sure. But this is way better because it explains how it is that type of activity, not exactly what it is. What you're going to do specifically, I mean, what are you exploring, or like how many different players or whatever, but that doesn't matter as much as how the game is about that type of gameplay. It's like a giant competitive board game, and how it is like that is these 4 terms. I think that is very useful, very clearly very useful. Importantly, this gives you an idea of the game design that is at work here. What is this type of game trying to balance? Well, these 4 things. It's literally in the genre term. Here you can see how something I think is really interesting is when you look at people that like a specific type of like game or genre term thing. Sometimes it's really interesting to wonder, is this type of thing actually that much better than other types of games or books or shows or whatever? Or is it just that this genre term is so vastly superior to most others, which are terrible and useless, that the people that have found out that they will enjoy these right now are just able to find many more of them, and the genre term is actually useful, so they know they'll actually enjoy them much more, if that makes sense? Thinking about a series of books. Is the series of books like that good, or is it just that it's that beneficial to have an actual way to figure out whether you're going to like something, you know, coherent with other things? Reading from different authors, you'll sometimes have the experience that you like a book, but you don't like a lot of other output from that author. And it might be because the author is not trying to have the things be the same thing. That doesn't make them a bad writer. They're designed to appeal to different people or you at different times in your life. But there are writers that are trying to write groups of books that are meant to appeal to a similar audience, and in a way where they don't like exhaust themselves, I guess. Again, the book is about how it's about this thing. They're all fantasy books or whatever, let's say, but that doesn't really matter. And the books focus also on what actually matters, which is how they are fantasy books. As a result, you can pick one up and suddenly you're enjoying a whole bunch of books in a similar category. I can't think of any popular writers that would fall into that category. Wow, that's crazy. How weird. I wonder who that would be. Quite a few currently very successful writers have done well with this approach. Mr. Fruit continues, aside from describing the gameplay loop very precisely, I like this 4X classification because of how different games in the genre have their own identity in how they interact with the 4Xs. Great. A game like Civilization has little difference between the different leaders and little differences between the different leaders, and is generally well balanced in its focus on the 4Xs. A game like Endless Legend has very asymmetrical balance, specifically on how different factions exploit their territories. One faction can relocate towns on a whim. Another has a huge focus on coastal regions, with most of their gameplay focused around the control and exploitation of the oceans. Another faction has only one city and relies on the exploitation of neutral villages around the map to lend troops and resources. Yet another faction has no science mechanic, instead relying on trading and stealing technologies from other players, leaving the economy to focus on supporting that. Amplitude Studios followed this up with Endless Space 2, where they took the asymmetrical faction design to the extreme, with all 4 categories, resulting in a nomadic vampire church leeching life from other worlds, cyborg bugs that consume planets, forcing them to move on and keep expanding, and also a faction that tries to implement a galactic-wide immigration program, breeding up minor races just to gather enough genetic data to splice their properties into the main population, at which point there's no longer a use for the unpure, a faction that is naturally run by an eco-fascist dictatorship of clones. Games like the Total War series cut out large parts of the first 3 X's to mostly focus on extermination and combat. And then there are games like Humankind that allow you to build craft which tools you'd like to have for any given stage of the game. In any way, the game term summarizes the opportunity cost that is so fundamental to this genre in a short tag, and that's why I like it. Fantastic examples, yeah. I mean, a sort of a looming question for a genre term is, if this is going to be meaningful, is it meaningful in a way that isn't just the exact same thing as saying this is this one specific game? We'll get into this in a little while with Ragnvar's point about genre terms being too specific instead. But for a genre term to be good, almost all genre terms are so bad that you wouldn't even consider this being a problem. But when we look at a genre term that might be argued to be useful in some way, you can see that there's an emerging problem. Like, yeah, it does tell you a lot about the game, but does that not just tell you exactly what one specific game's mechanics are? And the answer here is no, because it's a summary of the game's design formula. You could make a variety of games that fit within that structure. Personally, I think roguelike is one of the only popular, arguably useful genre terms. And one of the reasons is that you can imagine thinking of roguelike structure in gameplay. A big thing for genre terms in games that helps is that they tell you what vague form a session of gameplay will take. What are you going to do when you sit down to play in terms of vague time structure? And a roguelike, you can picture the roguelike runs. And so I can tell you this is a game with shorter or longer roguelike runs. This is a game where you have more control, or you start with more stuff, or every run you try to defeat the character you beat on the previous run, or they're left in the dungeon as a boss that you have to clear, or this is a less or more randomness, random choice focused roguelike. We'll get to that in a few minutes. These kinds of things. And so you can imagine from the genre term, it has this good quality. Roguelike isn't a perfect genre, sure. But as a genre term, it's useful in that it allows plenty of flexibility between specific games. After all, that's what this is for, right? You play a game in one of these genres, as it were, and these newfangled genres the kids are referring to, and then you can presumably use that to like find other things that would be riffs on the thing you liked. I think that this is the way that an interested person is able to explore a hobby. They learn something about the hobby, and then they can use that as a building off point to explore more, to find different things, not unrelated things, but similar yet also different things. And therefore an ideal genre term would include both functions. It tells you this is a general group of games in a useful way, but also you can see how a game would be different by using the genre term and then saying, oh, it's a roguelike, but with a very heavy focus on story. Or I could keep going. Lots of examples earlier. So yeah, that's a really great point. I think the idea that a genre term is valuable also to the extent that it can have riffs on it, like make sense. You can use your knowledge of the term to then kind of go further, is very, very helpful. And this is something that I think is fundamental to the way humans explore an area of entertainment. When you enjoy something and then you want more of that thing, but like it can be slightly different. Like you will enjoy it if it's slightly different. It's not like that one that you just saw was like the absolute perfect one in every way. And in the first place, just experiencing that one piece of entertainment changed you and made you more a person who would like something a little different. And so it's the most helpful if a genre term includes a mechanism for helping you do that. Now that you're on the same page about this general idea, you're now made aware, well, that was also a specific version of that general idea. And here is a different specific version of that same general idea. And then you can go explore that. I think that a lot of the time spent figuring out what you would enjoy for entertainment, as I advertised earlier in the video, is coming from the fact that there isn't usually a good way to do this. But if all genre terms were like this, that would be easy, don't you think? If there was just a map of like, oh, I want to go through RPGs, and there was any at all coherent progression through those, then it would be easy to do, right? I mean, you could make such a thing. Someone should really get on that. The worst genre term, oh, we're back. Mr. Fruit continues, in the world is the Russian genre tag of fantastica, which is used for stories that do not take place in our current world and do not use a historic setting. This includes fantasy, sci-fi, science fantasy, alternate history, post-apocalypse, superhero stories, like almost all anime, and so on. This means that George Orwell's 1984, Elden Ring, One Piece, and those disturbing Russian alt history pulp novels are all in the same genre. What I like to do when I read 1984 is marvel at the similarities to One Piece. Those are similar things. They're both fantastica, which is the genre that I am a cardboard cutout of. That's my personality. What I like to do when I watch One Piece is just recall George Orwell's 1984 because they couldn't be more similar. And the messed up thing is, if you've watched One Piece, you're probably trying to say, wait, actually, what about that one part in Ohara? Shut up. Shut your mouth. We're moving on. Yes, there is technically a 1984 part. Anyway, they're mostly about time travelers. The Russian alt history pulp novels are mostly about time travelers fixing history by helping Hitler and destroying the British Empire, but they also include a story about a Russian tank cadet that gets isekai to Mordor, where he helps Sauron to dominate Middle-earth while participating in an orc eugenics program, helping to replace the inferior orc genes with dominant Russian genes. Yikes, I wish I was making this up. Yes, those are real. There is an insane amount of them, and they are absurdly popular in Russia. That you left a link. I'm just going to leave that for people in the I don't want my video to get I mean, already saying the thing I just said. Whatever, I'll put the link in the description. Screw it. There's a link from Mr. Fruit below to a channel. I'm not necessarily endorsing the channel. Mr. Fruit says just a good introduction to this bizarre subgenre. I mean, but like, subgenre is just not the right word here. Either way, all share the same genre of fantastica. Look, sci-fi is not a precise genre by any stretch, but you know that it's in some way about the consequences of technological or scientific advancements. Fantastica has nothing. It's as if contains male protagonist was a genre. Right, like no, that doesn't, it just doesn't work. That's brutal. Wow, yeah, so of course, I mean, I think you can look at these and make comments about, like, is this society's values partly at work? Is it that people view this as being a useful genre term because they think that things that are not historical are therefore has a general value idea attached to it? These people exist. There's people in, I don't know, like the society I live in, who have this attitude like, oh, video games, fantasy, like those things aren't real, and so therefore they don't matter. This is an unbelievably immature understanding of human entertainment and activity, but that's what some people think. They think, well, why would you do that? That's such a waste of time. Oh yes, as opposed to what you do for your free time that's incredibly productive. I genuinely believe that upon analysis, you will find that if you explore interesting video games and stories and TV shows and stuff, that is one of the most productive things a human can spend their time doing, because what you are doing is exploring the human condition. You know, your existence on this planet. What do you want to spend your time doing? What do you feel like is worth it to you? And a lot of these things are you having that exploration. Just because the adventure you went on was in a video game, in no way means you like didn't go on that adventure. Why not? Because you can't post about it on Instagram? Is that why? You shallow little gremlin. I think that people really haven't thought about that very much. That's extremely immature, and I have to say, I have heard that take less recently, but still kind of common, I think, perspective. And so I wonder if something like the genre tag Fantastica is an artifact of, sorry, Russia, I'm sure there are very enlightened and mature people there, but perhaps could that genre tag be an artifact of an extremely immature cultural perspective on what entertainment like is? And so the idea is that these are all Fantastica because they're all like not reading a history book, which is the most productive thing a human can do. Not at all. Like, what? That's not helpful in the slightest. I genuinely believe that for most people, history is the least useful thing you study in school. And not necessarily because history isn't useful to know, but because you could easily pick it up at other times, and you can apply history most useful by thinking about something you're doing or something humanity's doing, and then just looking at that thing in the past and then getting context, not learning a general history of everywhere in the entire world immediately before you grow to adulthood. That does not especially apply to the world at large. I don't know. I mean, I did get that. I had a great education in that regard, if you think that's good. And I feel like many a time, no, like you need to go get a refresher, or the knowledge of history I got was very skewed, or it would have been perfectly fine to get the history retroactively, to apply history as a very useful tool, but not to assume that it's just inherently good to learn information from the past, which is gone, simply because that information was real. Like, no, that doesn't especially matter. That's so weird. What a delightful little foray into that extremely terrible. I think that one does take the cake. I agree that drama from Ragnavar is like really bad. That's a very bad genre term, but this is also pretty bad. Yeah. Just Rusty. I like genre terms. Hey, we're back, which tell you something about the actual structure of the art you're trying to describe rather than the vibe, a thing we brought up earlier. One of the things I like about the ways we describe classic music is that they're describing how a piece is organized. I did not know this. The exact instruments and tone of a minuet and a trio, for example, might change. A minuet and trio, or are those two separate genres? I know almost nothing about this subject. Despite taking AP Music Theory, it wasn't the type of music theory course we took. But if you sit down for one, a minuet or a trio, you're going to get a short, pleasant tune, a contrast piece played by just 3 musicians, and then a repeat of the pleasant tune. Oh, maybe minuet and trio is one thing. Whereas rock music is so vague. You can maybe expect like some electric guitars. It covers long ballads like Bohemian Rhapsody and 2-minute pop songs like Song 2 and Immigrant Song. This isn't a snobbery thing. I don't think that classics are better because they're classic or anything. It's just a good example. The genres are better. That is a snobbery thing. Those are just better genres. And to be fair, that's what you'd expect from a genre or a super genre, classical music, focused on like the principle of the thing, the like what the structure is, right? Music theory. In a similar vein, for all the actual name roguelike has a messy, unclear history and taxonomy, it does tell us something pretty functional about the structure of the game. You will be playing multiple runs of a game and retrying from mostly scratch. A fighting game is going to involve 2 human players brawling it out for a few rounds. Other genre tags are used for games like open world survival. I find much less useful as they're more interested in selling a vibe than a structure. Sure, I mean, open world is an interesting one because that could be applied as a useful genre, but open world currently has this really shallow marketing association as it's better for a game to be bigger and more broad, and therefore open world means the game is better to the shallowest and least understanding part of the audience. And so there's a market temptation to label games open world, even if it isn't like part of them, and it absolutely is not better for games to be more broad and this kind of thing. But I feel like in theory, open world could be a very good way to describe the structure of a game. the game's going to open up at certain points. I think it's helpful if you like Cyberpunk 2077. Cyberpunk is a game that contains an open world. I think it is most helpful to say it is a game that is moderately open world. There is a medium amount of the game that is not that open, that is like somewhat linear compared to other games that have an open world. There's an explorable open world. That's kind of one thing, but then it's also how open world is it? Probably it would be useful to have a different term for that. And it is like, I would say medium, in the medium tier open world. Maybe relatively open for medium openness, but still a lot more linear at times than something like Breath of the Wild or Elden Ring. But even then, I would say Elden Ring is maybe a touch more linear. For a very open game, it's a little on the less open side. Here, I would argue maybe it's just that it would be helpful to have multiple terms for, like, it contains an open world. That is a game design thing it contains. Kind of like saying that a game contains mini games or something. And then you could have a thing over here that is the openness or the structure, the linearness or lack thereof of the game. And it could be more or less. But yeah, roguelike is useful in that way. I think fighting game is another interesting genre where, like a 2D fighter, I feel like a lot of us are picturing a similar thing, but I hope we can agree that name is just too broad and it's a little bit too like natural language, right? Like it doesn't sound enough like a construct. It sounds like you're just saying it's a game where you fight. Like, I know that can be a bit picky. Saying a survival game is any game where you have a health bar and need to not have it deplete is obviously like sort of whatever, but I would argue that these terms being contrived is a little better. If you're creating a construct, let's put some artifice in there. Don't just say like it's a guns game, an FPS. Like, even though first person shooter, like, yeah, okay, it's not that good of a genre, it's at least better than saying like this is a game where you shoot. It might be that this is a game where you shoot, all caps, or the camel case, if you will, would be a useful genre term if it existed in some ways, but mostly because the name is just distinct. You would go, oh, like it's that thing. And if that's less natural language, I think that would help more. Hey, more about roguelikes. Eye patch notes. Lightly randomized arcade-like experiences, the layperson's roguelikes, were introduced to me long before I internalized the term. I played the games I had as a youngin' because I liked the box art or was gifted them. Fast forward to today, I specifically seek these lightly randomized arcade-like experiences for their cognitive benefits. I previously used the flowery phrase proximity of epiphany to highlight how randomness can lead the player to certain realizations that a purely self-guided experience could not. The following was the sentiment I echoed in that stream and in a game Discord server. I hold a very specific stance on randomness in games like these. There's a benefit to having random options that the player can organically find out which player options go together. A completely non-random game could lead to complacency and not exploring the full catalog. My perspective is one step past that. I like the randomness to encourage experimentation. Once I have the recipe I want to pursue, the randomness becomes a hindrance, a challenge in its own right, for example, not being too greedy with your build throughout a run, but a hindrance all the same. Galvanizing that last point, lightly randomized options ensure the player cannot be too greedy or waiting for the right options. Hades 1 has duo and legendary boons or Nova Drift super mods, and the list goes on. A player cannot reasonably lock in the game's deepest options in that first quarter of a run. By the halfway mark, quite possibly. The run refinement and mastery, iPatch Notes posits, comes from defining acceptable fluff that pads the player's first deep option. Interesting way to put it. And this is a case where you can see how roguelike might be a somewhat useful genre, but you could probably go further. Games that specifically focus on having that roguelike gameplay loop to provide a form of exploration are very different than games that don't. I've in the past suggested that a vague way that it's helpful to kind of add to roguelike as a mental construct for your own use is to think about games that are focused on the randomness versus games where the task you're being asked to do is to improvise. The goal is to create structure, but the format is unexpected, basically. That's completely different than games that are focused on the randomness itself. Yes, reining in that randomness to some degree is still good in those games, but For example, Risk of Rain 2 is a game where all the items are designed to combo together into one or very few, like, super builds. There really aren't distinct builds in the same sense, and you're not really meant to attempt them as such according to the game's design and mechanics. You can do it, but that doesn't mean that's what the game is fundamentally about. The items all being designed to work together, almost all very, very well, just isn't a piece of design that supports the idea that you create disparate archetypes, even though, again, you kind of can do that. It's definitely not the way the game's design is focused. Whereas in Hades, especially Hades 2, I would argue that Millennium's kit, even before you have boons, the basic abilities that your character has are designed to be like pieces of a setup, like a combo sort of, that you can use to enable each other. And so, yes, a lot of the boons in the game are designed to not work especially well together on the surface, or work way better with some other options. And you're meant to like construct a rotation that is probably really different from other rotations you've had. The gameplay itself also just changes a lot more depending on what things you get. You transform your abilities and they end up looking very different than they did in the past, depending on which run you're on and what boons you chose to get. That's just not the same use of, it's almost the exact opposite use of the roguelike gameplay loop. So you could argue roguelike is a useful genre term in both cases. You can kind of pinpoint vaguely what the flow of the game will be like, but there's a sort of mood or slant, again, how the game is about its general structure, that would be helpful here. Something like using it to inspire the player to come up with build options versus like you see what you get and roll with the punches in Risk of Rain 2. I would also like to add that there is some room for another bad thing about genres is they restrict what humans come up with for a gameplay loop. By focusing on what a game is and not how a game does what it does, there are genres that would be, or types of game that would be really obvious to make if you focused on how or why a game did things, that we really don't have much currently, to my knowledge anyway, and there isn't a clear reason why that is. For example, the thing iPatchNotes is noting, using a roguelike gameplay loop to help the player find different options, but then they just pick what they want to use. I feel like that's a really sensible and obvious thing to do, but I've played almost zero games ever that do that. Like, that's weird. Like, why? And you could argue maybe it's because it feels like the game isn't playing its hand early on. There are a number of games where you kind of get forced to use a few different options early on, a little, but it's a very minor part of the game. I've played a few games that have a roguelike sub-mode, but usually it's not to do this thing. For example, in Arknights and Limbus Company, there is a pretty robust piece of content in the game, a really robust mode in the game, where you play a roguelike. The rest of the game is not a roguelike, but there is a meaningful chunk of the game, really, well, my favorite part of both games, that is a roguelike. But these are designed the opposite way of what iPatchNotes is talking about. You basically build a roster of tools on your account, and then you're asked to make do by very carefully choosing only a few of those tools at a time. Yes, it's a roguelike, but it's designed more for you already having explored the field of what's possible, and your success in these game modes boils down significantly to you knowing what tools you could have from the field. Would it not have been useful to just, like, put that part first? You see what I mean? So you could explore the different options, you know, using the randomized game mode that makes you explore different options. A little bit weird that that isn't a thing in either of those games, or in my knowledge, any game that I've ever played. If you are a game developer of any description, you really ought to do this. It's extremely easy success. I guarantee people will like it if you frame it the right way. Just make a game where there is a roguelike and also not a roguelike, but put the roguelike at the beginning, you know, where it gives people the value of discovering new things. Anyway, you're certainly preaching the choir with me, iPatchNotes. To provide an example before iPatchNotes perceived failings of the roguelike tag, take Hades' ever-popular Sea Storm boon. A clean example because Sea Storm asks for 2 other boons, and a targeted example because of privileged status. Getting Sea Storm is relatively trivial, but piling on Jolted, Zeus, and Rupture Poseidon boons can make a normal run very greedy. From the perspective of route planning, the player can explore how much they can get away with waiting for their desired boons to show up. maybe the player will notice that having a call or an aid boon adds God Gauge support to Zeus and Poseidon, thereby decreasing the chance for any of their other boons. And therein lies the perceived issue. The player can be burned on not getting a desired option, but few games tagged roguelike actively describe or arm the player with anti-randomness tools. Hades itself has a reputation of being heavily luck-based, despite keepsakes and such eventually existing. For the Wiki Warriors, hammers, Daedalus hammers, can sometimes be controlled by what aspect the player uses. Yep, this is a topic I bring up a lot when we talk about Hades, where you'll notice a lot of reviews of Hades will clock the randomness being frustrating to them. Now, Hades 1 does contain the tools to heavily control this randomness. I've played literally hundreds of times doing that, and I can verify that you can very consistently get reasonably non-greedy setups. But people aren't wrong when they make that complaint. They're making it because you don't get those tools very early. And the game is from an era of roguelikes where there were just very few that were not focused on that, like, roll with what you get, randomness focus. I believe there are now more enough, like it's an improvisation game, roguelikes, that people kind of perceive that a little bit more. And it is interesting to note that Hades 2 is, by my clock, much more like combo focused than Hades 1. Like having a plan for what boons you get is a much bigger difference between just getting good boons than it was in Hades 1. Hades 2 is more combo-y or buildcrafty or improvisation focused, whereas Hades 1 is, I personally think, still pretty improvisation focused, but certainly relatively less. Like it's a little bit more like you could get the God Run or whatever, literally. And having a genre term that kind of clarifies that would be good. Now, whether you think it should be that we keep roguelike and then have two other genre terms versus we split roguelike and have kind of its own thing, you know, whatever, potato, in my opinion. But it is interesting to note how, yeah, it would pretty clearly be beneficial. Like, is the game trying to let you do that thing? And hopefully that was a specific enough example. Good job by Patch Notes. I bet it seemed like that was different than everybody else's approach to the topic, but because you put that in, we have a really nice segue to, okay, but like, does it really matter that genre terms are that bad? Well, no, as always, it's not that it's so bad, it's just that it could be much better, and this is how. Because the industry as a whole just isn't focused on this part of games, you know, how they actually work, the thing that actually matters, how they are what they are, we don't really have the useful version of a genre term system that we could have. You could make this. I wouldn't even be that hard, really. You just aren't going to be able to get people to actually use it anytime soon. Again, I would argue this is just a matter of time. I think that some older media, like books, are like interestingly better at this, though it's arguable. And you could say that the current trend might not look like it's going in that direction. Topic for another time, but it's arguable. But I think that you can see that over time, these things have gotten better. So I guess time will only tell. Since it feels related to this topic, I think this is a good time to talk about genres being too specific, which came up earlier. Now, again, it's not that I don't think this is an awesome topic, but I think it is worth noting that it just doesn't currently matter because most genre terms are just so bad that they're, you know, something that improves them, like not being way too specific, it just isn't that big of a deal. And as Ragnavar puts it, there's also issues when genres are too specific, but that's way easier to understand in my opinion. If a genre label is extremely specific, you're not really talking about a genre, you're talking about one work that's getting remade over and over. And until someone dares to push the boundary of what is accepted within that genre, it can't really be a genre. There's always some pushback from people who are overly invested in that hyper-specific definition if you try to push the boundaries of a genre. But to be blunt, they're just chasing the high they got when they first experienced the genre, and aren't actually that invested in the specifics. They're so caught up in the details that they can't see the forest for the trees, and thus can't find what they're actually looking for. Which sucks for them, truly, but until they try to get something out of their comfort zone, they're never going to be able to escape that. Right, and it's certainly not a reason not to try. It would be wrong to assume that just because a lot of people in the Souls-like genre, which we're going to talk about in a minute, of course, the Souls-like genre, I guess I should say, complain when games are even a little bit different from Dark Souls. Make no mistake, that doesn't mean it actually matters if the game is similar to Dark Souls. That's just their way of reconciling the fact that they want more of that formative experience they had. You should still make the game different from Dark Souls, and people will like it if you do that. Those games that people have in those games have done well, though not as much as they could. I can guarantee you that if you just ignore those people, they themselves will like the game that you will make. But it's still useful to take inspiration from where the game came from. There's a lot of games where you can pretty clearly point to, oh, the parts of this game that are different from Dark Souls are the best parts, and the parts that the people who say they want the game to be the most like Dark Souls like the most, even though they say that they don't want differences. And the parts of these games that are the most similar to Dark Souls are the worst parts, even though that's what the people who say they like Dark Souls say they want. Lies of P is a good example. The weapon system is for me a highlight, the stat system is for me a low point, and those are respectively the thing least like and the most like Dark Souls. So interesting to note. Continuing, the Ragnavar says the modern classic example of today is Souls-like, Soulsborne, whatever the label is these days. But roguelikes and roguelites have a documented, somewhere anyway, history of the exact same issue. No, it's not a dungeon crawl, so it can't be called a roguelike. Oh, and so forth. This sort of thing either works itself out, like first-person shooters and roguelikes or roguelites, or people figure out that no, it was the specific combination of other genres, tropes, and features, etc. that made X game good, and it doesn't make for a useful genre descriptor anyway. Frankly, I think Souls-like will go the same way, as the genre still hasn't expanded beyond the really specific list of features from Dark Souls 1, largely due to the sheer gravity of FromSoft's games within said genre, pulling everyone back to their ideas. There's been some shift with the recent increase in games that have been put in the Souls-like bucket, but it's still yet to be seen if the exploration of what a Souls-like even can be will continue further or not. Oh, well, it definitely will continue further, but sure, like whether that will really register as being Souls-likes, whether the developers that do that will be trying to make a thing that they're trying to telegraph as being like a Souls-like, but just with some differences, or whether people will make something that objectively is a lot like a Souls-like, but is just sort of over here, for example. I would argue that there's an argument to be made in our current landscape that people are going the second way. There's a lot of games that are affected heavily by the popularity of Souls-likes, but I wouldn't say that they share a lot of actual like specific details with them, and so for a lot of people they don't register as Souls-like, even though they're very heavily inspired by those games. You could argue there's some sections of Kirby and the Forgotten Land and that one Pokemon Arceus game that like those are there because the Souls-like genre is popular to some extent, but they don't register as Souls-likes, and that may be because in some cases creators of those games decided to just go far afield instead. And who can blame them if the Souls-like fan base is going to contain so much vitriol about any tiny difference? The natural response is to just make not tiny differences in your Souls-like experience. Of course, those games aren't Souls-likes in many other ways if you want to get into it. Yes, this is an interesting one where you could say that this is a way to kind of evolve genres a little bit. I mean, it's astonishing when you analyze a term like this, how infrequently a game is made which is trying to make the gameplay of the thing it is riffing on better, which is trying to apply the game design of the video game that it is based on, rather than just like the aesthetic. You know, taking something like Lies of P, for example, yeah, I guess the weapon system where you break the weapon in half and you get the handle, and then you've got the head of the weapon, the hitty part of the weapon. Like, that is kind of something that I see as being you're sort of addressing a problem of sorts in games like Dark Souls and Elden Ring, where you can upgrade your thing for damage, but then you can change the scaling and abilities with this other part. Yes, but there's also lots of parts where it's not really clear why you would do this if you wanted to like further the genre. They kind of just wanted to make a Souls-like, and then they did put something original in it. You might interpret it differently. You might say, oh, well, they just failed to make a good stat system, but they did want to make a game that was very original mechanically. Whatever, we could argue about it. I think it's the former. I think they just wanted to make a Souls-like, and they happened to make a very good part of the build system that is an improvement on something maybe that annoyed them about Souls-like games. But a lot of it is derivative in a bad way, and if they just kept trying to make new things, that would have been better in pretty much every way. It might not have been as trailerable or something, but the people who actually played it would have liked it better if they had done it differently. So what a shame. But I'm, in the future, hopefully, because that stat system is really bad in my opinion. I really liked Lies of P. I despise that stat system. It's one of the worst parts of a game that has an interesting build system I've played in a long time. It's bad. Basically completely pointless. It's kind of a scam. In my document that is a list of rankings about games and their build systems, the only things I rate an F are games where the build system is kind of a scam. Like, it presents the idea that you should make build choices, but you actually really ought not to make build choices, and the player benefits more if they don't do the thing that the system tells them to do, which is like make a choice. If you don't make a choice, that's better than making a choice, which to me is kind of like, well, if you present it as the player makes a choice, that's even worse than if you didn't even have a build system. You kind of scammed the player into thinking they were supposed to choose, but they're not, or it isn't beneficial. The game heavily does not reward choosing. Or sometimes it will be that you literally just choose what items you cannot use, and that's it. That's the only thing the build system is doing. That's sort of similar, not the same as a scam, I guess. Poor Lies of P, because there's so many other good parts, and they overcome the bad parts, in my opinion. Again, the good news about these bad build systems is you can usually just look up how to trivialize them and then delete that part of the game, pretty much. You could even install mods that literally delete or trivialize that part of the game, and then just enjoy the good parts. So to an enfranchised player, it's not a big deal, but it's still bad. Okay, shall we talk for a few minutes at the end of this parlay about ways to find games you would enjoy? I mean, we hit upon a lot of parts of it already, so this will be sort of a summary in some form. One way is the application of avoiding genres that Ragnavar talked about a little before, and then my addition is to propose that if a game or a book or whatever show is harder to summarize or genre box into one genre, it's more likely to be good. And the reason is that it's less likely to be derivative. And if people just think of ideas for a thing and put them in the thing because of a reason, it turns out they're usually pretty good. Humans are good at making things as long as they do them for actual reasons instead of just, I want to telegraph that this is like this other thing. And while it's perfectly fine to just enjoy stuff in a genre, if you want to call it that is comfortable to you, that's okay. That doesn't really make the genre that useful. It's often quite outwardly obvious the thing will be similar. You can just enjoy watching a bunch of isekai anime. It's fine. That's okay. But there is another thing that is also helpful to do, that is much harder to do, that is more beneficial for people as humans, which is to be able to find things that are branching out from a thing they like. And I would argue this is where genres would ideally be useful. So oversimplifying by saying, that genre doesn't correlate with something I like is important and something you kind of have to do. I believe you can take it a step further and say if a thing is less definable, that often means it's just better to an extent. If a thing is just a total mess that doesn't feel like it's made by coherent human values, yes, sometimes that will mean it isn't easy to box or define by a genre, but a lot of those works you just won't know about because they're terrible and nobody liked them. And so if something is relatively well known, but it's relatively hard to define, I think those things are consistently better than other things. That doesn't mean that you're a better person if you consume more of them. You should consume the amount of them that you enjoy. But just to say that I think that is a surprisingly straightforward, helpful method for figuring out things that you might like. If something is a classic RPG, I feel like it's extremely likely that's going to be highly derivative and dry, especially from your modern perspective. And if it's harder to explain the kind of RPG that a game is, that's more likely to be something that you'll enjoy. If you decide to play a game from the Final Fantasy series, I think you're more likely to have an enjoyable experience if you pick one that has a system that is a little weirder to you, rather than one that is exactly what you're familiar with. And if you could historically conclude that a game has a system that is less common, like done less often, yeah, I think in some ways it's more likely that will be better. I'm sure that a complaint rising in people's minds is the idea that, well, Zandy, couldn't it be that that system isn't common because it was bad and then they didn't do it again? Like, that is possible. I guess I just feel like in many cases, when a system is derivative, I mean, it's not only not that good, it's also you've literally done this before. So if a game system isn't that good, but you don't know what it is, you haven't done it before, I would argue that is still of more human value. You might just retroactively, once you're done with the game, you might look back and go, no, that wasn't that good, but I did have a much more interesting time playing it. You see what I mean? A way to think about this is also that a lot of games, if you thoroughly understand their formula, become very simple and uninteresting, but they could be interesting as long as you don't yet have that knowledge. You know, a kind of weird thing about balancing in games is that the balance isn't bad in a way that affects you until you know it's bad. If you don't know that there's something much more effective than the thing you're using, therefore pressuring you to use that instead or constantly making you notice what you're missing out on, then it's kind of the same as if that didn't exist, right? There's a sort of quantum balance. The problem in a game with a build system is that the activity is about you understanding the other options that exist. So you can't just say, oh, well, like, hope that players don't find out the game is poorly balanced. The game is about learning about its balance if it's about making builds. So you can't use that method. Well, but if the build system is highly unfamiliar, you will figure out what is good and bad a lot slower, possibly slowly enough that you'll be done with the game by the time you figure it out. And for the first few games with a build system or type that you're not familiar with, I believe that this is very effective. So when you explore, yeah, I think even if you get a game that maybe in the grand scheme of things you'd evaluate isn't that good, it's still better to land on a game that has an unfamiliar system when you do that, rather than a familiar system. Because if we assume they're both bad, I mean, one of them you haven't done before, so you'll at least experience something new that way. And some of the things that can be bad about a build system won't be until you have a little more experience with that type of system. So go figure. It's like they say with something like Dungeons and Dragons. If you are a bad game master for a little while, it'll be fun for a little while. You have time to learn to do it in a more effective way. You don't have to do everything perfectly right away, just start, and it'll work itself out. I mean, as long as you try to do it well, and then it's okay to fail at the beginning. Same thing with writing. You know, your first like 5 books or whatever are going to be a complete disaster. Might as well write them. I mean, have some fun. Just have some fun. You can do other things. If I could guarantee you, you have to play a game at gunpoint that I promise you will be bad. The game will be bad. No matter what game you play next, it won't be good. Well, then tell me, what kind of game would you like to pick? You have to play a game to, I don't know, get this over with, right? Remove the curse, play a game and have it be bad. You're going to pick a pretty random game. You know, you're not going to try to pick a good game because I just cursed you. It's going to be bad automatically. So are you going to pick a familiar game or an unfamiliar game? And I mean, some people might pick familiar and that's fine. You might pick it at different times in your life too, but that's the point I'm trying to make. Obviously we could, and we have other times, let's not go into, yeah, like having a gigantic audience full of people that are able to give you ridiculously specifically targeted recommendations because they've watched hundreds of hours of you discussing video games is a good way to get game recommendations, but nobody other than me on the entire planet has arguably ever done that. And so, I mean, that's not that useful, not this way anyway, have they done that. So that's not very useful advice, but you could do it. Anyway, moving on. I don't know. You kind of can't, not really, but I mean, no one's keeping you from doing it. You could try. You copy my career model if you want to. Just be careful. That is a very helpful part of it. Certainly writing down what you like about these games can be helpful. And I do think it's useful to, if you write down games that you've played, to write down what you think their like actually good genre terms would be. Just make up your own, basically. Just make sure you know what they mean. That being said, I think the level below of this topic, if we were to keep talking, would be that people don't actually have specific tastes that restrict them. You can enjoy anything that is well done in the world. You don't have to like just the things that are the genres you found so far that you enjoy. something either is only good from limited perspectives or would be good from many balanced perspectives. And for the latter group of things, you can enjoy all of them. So you sort of don't need to know what genre terms something has. I think it would be much more effective to hear a game described by what it's good at. And that is why I feel like playing games that are the exception rather than the rule, or games that a creator on the internet plays because they do a certain specific type of game design thing that they like build systems, is generally a more effective way to find games you'll enjoy. Watching like a game design YouTuber, a Game Maker's Toolkit, perhaps, and looking for games that way. The video is about dungeons or something, and he uses as an example a game because he thinks it has cool dungeons. And you go, I want cool dungeons. And then you play the game because you want to play the fun dungeons in it, which is what he said was the thing the game was good at. Playing Deus Ex because it's a sci-fi game rather than because it's brought up in a conversation about immersive sims, a genre which you find compelling once you learn what the person meant about that, obviously wouldn't be as effective. Like, you don't want to play it just because of that vague theme. How is it about that theme? But if you play it because it's brought up as a useful example in a discussion, obviously that's much more likely to be useful. I hope I'm not babying most of the audience here, especially those of you who commented on this parlay. Like, you already do this. I know for a fact you already do this, because you've requested other individual parlay that have brought up this subject. So I don't mean to condescend at all, just to say that I think that it is not hard to get better game recommendations. You just have to not do the thing that everything our culture does is not helpful. Don't watch trailers, don't use genre tags, don't browse Steam. Instead, do anything but that, pretty much. But if you want specific tactics, there they are. And I feel like pretty consistently, yeah, you'll have back-to-back-to-back experiences you either really enjoy, or you'll be able to know you won't enjoy quickly and then drop them quickly. I do set aside a few hours every week on Sunday morning, if you must know, to try a block of new things. Sometimes it's shows, sometimes it's games. Sometimes we'll do monthly, my partner and I do a little theme night where we have to watch like at least 3 different shows or try at least 3 different games and drop them within 20 minutes. And then we go back, talk about what we thought. That was the first hour. And then in the second hour, we can just enjoy the one we wanted to. The idea is, obviously, they're not going anywhere. If you like all 3 anime pilot episodes, for example, then watch all 3 shows, whatever. But it can be useful to create that form of forced perspective. Even the simple act of giving you 2 cups of tea and saying, which one do you prefer? You can have 1 more cup of that other tea. But like after this conversation, I'll give you as much of them as you want, can be very helpful. Just that forced perspective or standards between them is useful. And having it be that you go into the conversation knowing it's okay. I'm not going to watch all of a show right now. There's plenty of good shows to watch. I just want to see what I think of these shows compared to each other. I just think is a much better way to get in touch with what you actually want to do. Just try a bunch of stuff. Is this encouraging to people is anyone watching this actually having trouble with this? Did that help? Let me know. And let me know if you want to join in on Crew Parlay. This is a service that we offer at the $5 tier on my Patreon and through YouTube members and Twitch. If you're a Twitch sub or an Amazon Prime subscriber on Twitch, you get this as well. All you have to do is connect your Discord account and whatever service, and then you get added to this channel and you can post on these Crew Parlay topics, and I would love to hear your input. There's currently few people giving a lot of input. I would be happy to have like tons more people. There are a lot of people, dozens more people that have this perk that just don't use it. So it's okay if you don't want to, but it's here if you do. Again, a lot of the people watching this video have this already and wouldn't need to pay to use it this month. So I just want you to be able to if you want to. The topic for the next one is, what is everyone's favorite TTRPG character they've played with and why? Is there a build in there? Maybe some dynamic storytelling? I want to know all about it from Mr. Food, from the Parlay 2 months ago where I asked for some Crew Parlay suggestions. I added, you could also talk about a character concept you just really want to play eventually, or that someone else in your play group played. Will be very interesting to hear. I'm sure a lot of you do have a TTRPG character you've played with that you want to talk about. It's going to be difficult to get that to fit in a reasonable amount of time. Probably a lot of you have a lot to say, and it will be hard to present it in a way other than as a story. So do your best, but it's fine. The responses to this genre one were hilariously long, but that's fine. We're here to have the whole discussion, and it's completely fine for Crew Parlay to be longer than normal Parlay. In the future, these will almost certainly get long enough that I will pause in the middle and kind of teleport around a little bit. I can do that in the middle of the way I record. I have my recording set up that way. So it's perfectly fine. In a way, these are currently at the minimum length they're going to be. They'll be huge in the future, and that's totally fine. That's what these are for. It's a once a month thing. You get a big Chongo one. I think that's fun. And once I get Parlay wrangled back together and get myself into better shape with that mentally, normal Parlay will tend to be slightly shorter than they currently tend to be now. That's actually already happening a little, orbiting around 40 minutes instead of orbiting around 55 minutes or whatever they are now. So having a big long one is, not bad, kind of fits in that regard. Anyway, looking forward to it. Again, you could join us with a link in the description if you'd like to, but a lot of people listening already do have access to this, so we'd love to have you. I don't feel like it's bad to submit something weird or specific or off topic. That often makes a great part. Eye patch notes, you kind of went into detail about a specific in-game example that felt less related to the topic of like what genres are bad, but gave a more practical example and ended up being very useful. When people give different kinds of responses, it makes it easier for me for what it's worth. So don't feel bad about saying something that, is off topic. I'm saying this full well knowing I'm exactly the kind of person who would not comment on this kind of thing on most channels I follow, but my goal is to make a space where even I would to crawl out of my turtle shell or something. Anyway, see you in the next one.